We've already heard quite a lot about the differentiation and segmentation of the market, that coffee drinking is growing more sophisticated in what might be called the mature markets in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm going to talk a bit more about where the growth trends are, particularly in the developing and emerging markets, and India and China particularly offer good potential for future growth. The public ledger is the primary soft commodity reporting publication, also online. Many people in the room hopefully know it here, and our reporting on coffee, cocoa, etc. is well known throughout the world. In fact, my colleague Emil Mehmet did most of the research for this particular presentation, so I need to thank him. So as we can see here, Asia and Latin America are the biggest exporters, and North America and Europe are the biggest importers in the world. And we will see growing trends, particularly where we reckon obviously in Asia that consumption will also grow, particularly over coming years, that India and China, Vietnam and other countries, as the middle class grows bigger, these countries have the capacity to consume a lot more coffee, and we're already seeing this, in fact, with Starbucks and other chains being much more present in these particular countries. So these are the countries, particularly in Asia and Latin America, where we do see continuing consumer growth, because the population growth trends are higher, lots of young people, and unlike what has been said earlier about younger people in the West perhaps not drinking coffee so much, of course that's a mixed bag literally, because some are obviously drinking Starbucks, some are not drinking some of the more conventional established products. But obviously the big growth could be seen in the developing world. And then if we go on here, as has been already said today, global coffee production has risen by 50% since 1993, and Robusta has been closing on Arabica. Obviously, we've heard some interesting comments today about the Brazilian crop coming up and whether that will be hit for the next 2 years, and certainly that may make a big difference, as has been said, on the surplus situation and on prices going forward. So we're now going to go on and have a look a bit at production. Obviously, as has been said, Brazil has had huge production advances over recent years and government intervention due to low prices. It is going to be very interesting if some of the comments that I'm hearing about Brazil and the current crop and the next crop go forward, then clearly that configuration will change. But we've also heard that Colombia, for instance, is producing more, and there will be other destinations, other origins that can take up the slack perhaps. Also Vietnam, particularly, we've seen an expansion in the planted area over recent years and a record coffee crop. And Vietnam indeed is one of the countries which we think will also increase its domestic consumption more, along with Indonesia and other countries. Obviously what we're seeing is more liberalised markets in Vietnam, younger people wanting more differentiated consumption, very much the patterns in Vietnam following the West, as has been seen over the past 10 years or so. And then Colombia, as was said earlier, there's some good prospects there, but a tree renovation programme may mean smaller crops. Recovery is on the way and stocks have come down to almost zero. So we're seeing some interesting trends in Colombia. And then Indonesia has been hit by bad weather. In fact, there's been heavy rainfall at the moment in Indonesia, and also there's the prospect of an El Nino coming up, which I don't think anyone has mentioned yet, but I've been looking into the El Nino patterns over the past week or so, and it does look as though we're due for an El Nino in the next 6 months, certainly in the autumn, which will adversely impact crops perhaps in Southeast Asia, certainly Australasia, places like that, but may have a much better impact on South America and Central America because of the differential rainfall patterns. So the El Nino in the autumn of this year, I want to flag up, really will, this weather pattern will have a bigger impact than perhaps some people have predicted, judging by the current forecasts. And now we're going on to demand patterns. Growth in the EU and US is almost flat. This trend may well continue, but as we've seen earlier from the previous presentation, there is room for growth, certainly, and from Nestlé in segmented and differentiated markets. So obviously we've already heard how many different types of Starbucks one can buy. There's no reason to suppose that niche will continue in terms of these coffee chains launching new products, and of course in the developing world where Starbucks and others are making their presence felt, similarly the prospects for product differentiation are good. And then the sheer fact is Asia is drinking more and more coffee, particularly in the countries where it's grown. Of course, as production increases in certain countries like Vietnam, the surplus that is there for domestic consumption will grow alongside export trends. And one can see particularly that China has been increasing in recent years. In fact, all these countries, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, have been increasing coffee consumption in recent years. And this is allied to the fact that younger people in those countries are becoming more consumer savvy. They've got more disposable incomes, particularly in the cities, and are adopting these trends with the inroads being made by Western coffee chains, and also the rise of domestic coffee chains in those countries. Plus, there's been relatively robust economic growth in some of these countries in recent years. That may be slowing down now, but I think the underlying trends are there, because we're still seeing 7-8% economic growth every year in China. India's been down to about 5%. There's been some wobbles in Thailand and Philippines, but the underlying growth is there because younger people, it's still a massively expanding population compared with the West, and the shift from the towns to the cities. And in fact, in China now, over half of the people live in cities, so that is meaning a growth in coffee consumption. Also, China has got the most potential for growth, in my view, probably followed by these other countries such as India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and as I said, India, because of its vast size and growing middle class. But China is very, very currently underrepresented, if you like. Chinese consumption is growing at 25% a year, and this is in a country where the average price of a cup of coffee is more than double the hourly minimum wage. But clearly, with the trend to urbanisation, this exponential upward curve should continue. And in 2012-13, China's domestic consumption reached a record high of 1.6 million bags, and this is likely to rise to over 2 million bags this coming year. So, in fact, the projections are that China's annual consumption will be between 10 and 15 million bags by 2023, in 10 years' time. So this, I would suggest, makes it a huge global player potentially in terms of coffee consumption, and makes a big market shifting difference to the whole way that we will see the coffee market playing out going forward. Starbucks, Nestle and others have recognised how great China's potential is, and have expanded their operations greatly across China. And as China's market grows more liberalised, this trend will continue, and as in the other Asian countries, including Vietnam, Taiwan, etc. So also the great potential is there according to per capita consumption in China, and we've seen that that's extremely low and compared with the West, although it has a lot of capacity. Now Brazil, again we've seen domestic demand on the rise, as in Colombia as well. What's interesting is the way that these mature coffee producers are also increasing their consumption at home, and of course if there is a bit of a supply wobble in Brazil, as has been predicted currently, and over the next year or two, then clearly that will make a difference to prices going forward in the domestic and global markets as well. And also Russia's an interesting market where consumption has been growing, as you can see by the blue bars in recent years. Russia's a very interesting market where it used to get a lot of tea very cheaply from India. In fact, India and Russia used to have a big barter agreement for tea up until 1991 or so. That has still gone forward, and India and Sri Lanka particularly still barter tea with Russia for oil and other strategic goods. But interestingly, Russian coffee consumption has grown exponentially in recent years. Obviously, again, economic growth could be a key factor here, but certainly Russia, Ukraine, these sort of markets in the former Soviet republics are ones to watch. And then India, again, India is a huge market, potentially growing middle class in the cities. I've just had some figures through from India which look very interesting, that I'll just quickly read to you. That the Indian Coffee Board has said that coffee consumption has gone up 40% in the past decade. You can see it there from that very low base in 2001, 2002, going up quite significantly. And from a current level of 90 grams per capita, this sits very poorly, obviously, with 4 kilograms per person in Europe. But the Coffee Board sees a huge potential over the next decade to grow that significantly, and they've got a 5-year plan to try and take coffee consumption forward in India. And obviously in India you're also seeing metropolitan cities with Madras, Chennai, Delhi, etc., very much adopting Western stores, these new ones like Cafe Coffee Day, Barista Lavazza, Starbucks and Costa Coffee, making coffee drinking more fashionable amongst the younger generation. So in fact, India's domestic coffee production is 315,000 tonnes and about 115,000 tonnes imported. Consumption about 125,000 tonnes currently, but set to grow. And then just briefly going on to a supply and demand outlook. After 2016, we suggest that output will struggle to keep up with demand. World production set to reach 190 million bags by 2023. Of course, these are broad projections, but they're figures that we've worked out that we think are realistic, and similarly consumption rising close to 200 million bags. So although, as has been described, as rather flat consumption in Western countries, a lot of this increase, as with sugar and other soft commodities, will be coming from the developing world based on population growth and continued economic growth. And traditional coffee markets will therefore have a reduced market share in the world, as a percentage anyway. And Brazil and China will be among the top consumers in the world, which will certainly make a difference to the way that the market moves for the future. And the price forecast is neutral to bearish for Robusta and Arabica for the next 2 seasons, but more bullish over the longer term. And we suggest that Arabica's premium over Robusta is set to tighten further. I mean, obviously Robusta demand will continue to be strong in certain markets and Arabica in others, and there's no reason to suppose that these trends suggested here will continue. So that's it. Thank you very much.